Today we are reviewing a profoundly layered piece that analyzes U.S.-Israel geopolitical relations, specifically focusing on the shifting stances on Iran by interpreting them through the spiritual lenses of Jewish philosophy, biblical archetypes, and internal Israeli unity. A tighter thematic bridge is needed to connect the geopolitical analysis of U.S.-Israel relations with the internal domestic disputes regarding the military draft.
Definitely.
Because right now, reading this material feels like exploring a massive house with a missing staircase. Like the ground floor explores the massive macro-political stakes of America and Iran, and the upper floor explores the micropolitics of the Haredi draft, the ongoing debate in Israel regarding military exemptions for the ultra-Orthodox.
Right.
But as a reader, I am left completely stranded on the ground floor without any clear way to walk up to that second level.
I experienced that exact same structural gap during my read-through. The weakness here is that the narrative shift from discussing the U.S. president's role in the Iranian nuclear threat to the internal divisions in Israel over military exemptions, well, it feels entirely abrupt and jarring.
Oh, jarring is the perfect word for it.
Right. Because we spend the first half of the material deeply entrenched in these existential global stakes. We are reading about changing American administrations, shifting geopolitical alliances, and, apocalyptic ideologies.
Yeah, the reader's adrenaline is just highly elevated.
Exactly. And then, without any sufficient transitional mechanism at all, the text suddenly pivots to societal debates about who serves in the military and who studies Torah.
Which is just such a massive shift.
It is, because these two halves read like distinct essays stitched together. The urgency of the initial geopolitical threat is heavily diluted by the time the text actually pivots to those societal debates.
I really struggled with that pivot. When I hit that transition, my brain actually stopped for a sec. I was wondering if I had accidentally skipped a page or missed a paragraph.
Yeah, that's exactly what happens.
Because when a writer sets up high-stakes global politics, the reader prepares for a very certain type of intellectual journey. So pivoting to local draft politics without a bridge feels like a bait and switch.
Absolutely.
So, how do you prevent that kind of cognitive whiplash for a reader who is expecting a continuous, cohesive narrative?
Well, you have to fundamentally change the structural relationship between the two topics. Frame the internal debate over unity not as a separate social issue, but as the direct spiritual prerequisite for surviving the geopolitical threat described in the first half of the material.
Oh, okay. I see.
Right now, the geopolitical threat and the domestic dispute are treated as parallel ideas. They run alongside each other, but they never actually touch. They need to be presented as cause and effect.
Cause and effect, right.
Yeah, the text needs to argue that solving the internal draft dispute is the literal mechanism for neutralizing the external Iranian threat.
Okay, so making it a strict prerequisite, instead of the narrative saying, here is a terrifying external threat, and by the way, we also have these internal arguments to deal with, the author needs to say, the only way to survive this terrifying external threat is to solve this internal argument.
Exactly. That's the framing it needs.
But how does the author actually write that transition? Because right now the text discusses the prominent scholar Rabbi Kessin and his concept of holding a mirror up to the nation during times of external instability.
Right, the mirror concept.
Yeah, so the pieces are there, but it leaves the reader to do all the heavy lifting of connecting that philosophical mirror to the very real draft dispute.
And you never want to leave the reader to do the heavy lifting of your core thesis. If I were editing this, I would take that Rabbi Kessin section and use it to explicitly lay out the logic.
How so? What would that look like?
I would write a stabilizing sentence right there. Something like, because Israel cannot control external variables like a changing American administration or shifting stances on Hezbollah, its only true defense mechanism is internal cohesion.
Wow, yeah, that is super direct.
By putting that logic plainly on the page, you tell the reader exactly why you are changing the subject from Washington and Tehran to Jerusalem and the Haredim.
Right, and by explicitly laying out that logic, you give the reader permission to care about the draft dispute within the context of the Iranian threat.
Exactly.
You're essentially taking the massive adrenaline built up in the first half of the piece and, injecting it directly into the domestic policy debate. It gives the internal dispute apocalyptic stakes.
Which is exactly what the author wants to do anyway. But to make that work, we also have to look at the placement of the historical precedents.
Oh, you mean the biblical examples?
Yeah, the material relies heavily on the Tower of Babel and the destruction of the Second Temple due to baseless hatred. Currently, those examples are sort of floating near the end of the piece.
They are, yeah.
I'd relocate the historical examples of the Tower of Babel and the destruction of the Second Temple to immediately follow the discussion of the Iranian nuclear threat.
Oh, interesting.
Position internal unity as the ultimate strategic armor against external apocalypse right from the start.
Let me unpack the psychology of that structural move for a sec, because that is fascinating. If the author establishes that historical pattern, the idea that Jewish sovereignty historically falls due to internal division, not just external force, right after describing the threat of a nuclear Iran, the reader isn't just willing to read about internal unity. They are actively looking for it.
They will practically demand it. By moving those historical precedents up, you are teaching the reader how to interpret the text. You show them the historical rule, external survival requires internal unity.
Right.
Then you show them the external threat, Iran. The reader's brain naturally begs the question, okay, if internal unity is our only armor, what is our internal unity status right now?
Right. It naturally sets up the next section.
And at that precise moment, you hand them the Haredi drive dispute. The transition feels completely inevitable rather than abrupt.
It totally changes the draft debate from a political talking point into an existential diagnostic test.
Exactly.
But even if the author perfectly clarifies that structural bridge, we still have to grapple with how those external forces are characterized in the first half.
Ah, yes, the characterizations.
The fascinating theological comparison between the U.S. president and the biblical figure of Esau requires more contextual grounding to prevent the spiritual metaphor from being overshadowed by contemporary political polarization.
Yeah, this is where reader psychology becomes a total minefield.
Right?
Asserting that a contemporary politician has a messianic mission to destroy the Hitlerian evil of Iran or casting them as a literal reincarnation of Esau is highly provocative.
Highly provocative, yeah.
Without sufficient theological scaffolding to explain how Jewish philosophy maps ancient archetypes onto modern events, the reader is likely to interpret this as a literal partisan endorsement rather than a spiritual metaphor, and that causes them to miss the broader philosophical point entirely.
I have to admit, I tripped over the phrase messianic mission during my read-through. I mean, the colloquial understanding of the word Messiah in our modern secular culture is a religious savior figure.
Oh, completely.
So when a reader encounters that specific word applied to any deeply polarizing modern politician, their analytical brain immediately shuts down, and their tribal emotional brain takes over. Defensive walls go up instantly.
They absolutely do.
So how can the author use these ancient spiritual archetypes to make their point without sounding like they are, writing a partisan campaign ad?
By fundamentally changing the focal point of the comparison, shift the focus away from the individual politician's personal destiny and emphasize the archetype, clarifying how these biblical dynamics represent historical forces of action and spirit.
Ah, okay.
You have to depersonalize the metaphor. It shouldn't be about the specific character traits of the man currently sitting in the Oval Office. It should be about the historical function the leader of the American superpower currently occupies on the world stage.
So you depersonalize it to bypass the emotional tripwire. You treat the concept of Esau not as a personality profile, but as a geopolitical slot that someone happens to be standing in at this moment in history.
Exactly. And to achieve that, you have to set up that historical slot much earlier in the text. I wouldn't wait to spring the Esau comparison on the reader pages into the geopolitical analysis.
When would he bring it in?
I would introduce the Esau and Jacob dynamic right when mentioning the quote about the U.S. president and the Israeli prime minister calling themselves two brothers.
Oh, that makes sense.
Seed the archetype the very moment the concept of brotherhood is introduced. It prepares the reader for a metaphorical framework rather than a literal political one.
That certainly smooths out the narrative flow. But what about the explosive terminology itself? Like words like messianic mission or referring to assassination attempts as divine wake-up calls. They carry so much contemporary baggage.
They really do.
I wonder if it would be simpler just to remove the Esau metaphor entirely. It feels like such a high-wire act to balance without alienating a huge portion of your audience.
It is a high-wire act, certainly, but I wouldn't advise removing it because it is a deeply compelling philosophical framework that the target audience will appreciate. It just requires stabilization.
So how do you stabilize it?
I'd rephrase the messianic mission concept. To clarify, it means a historical role to fight physical evil in a given generation.
That's much better.
Yeah, that retains the exact same theological weight without triggering the reader's secular political alarm. It replaces the religious baggage of a savior with a concrete job description.
And a reader can objectively evaluate a job description. But how do we define the terms of that job description so the reader knows exactly what Esau is supposed to be doing and what Jacob is supposed to?
I'd add a stabilizing sentence explicitly defining the parameters of the metaphor. Something very clear, such as, in Jewish thought, Esau represents the physical might of the world, a role America currently occupies, while Jacob represents the spiritual focus. The cooperation of both historical forces is required to defeat evil.
Oh, I see the underlying mechanics of that, Ed. By explicitly defining the variables, Esau equals physical might, Jacob equals spiritual focus. You're teaching the reader an algebraic formula.
Exactly.
You're saying X plus Y equals the defeat of evil. Once a reader understands that formula, they stop seeing contemporary politicians and start seeing historical forces at play. They evaluate the argument based on the math of the philosopher rather than their own personal voting record.
And that elevates the text from a contemporary political op-ed into a timeless philosophical exploration. The archetypes become lenses through which to view current events, rather than the current events acting as a convoluted justification for the archetypes.
Let's follow that algebraic formula a step further. If the author perfectly clarifies the roles of America as Esau and Israel as Jacob and establishes that their cooperation is necessary, those two forces still need a reason to unite in the first place.
Right. They need a common enemy.
They need an antagonist. And that brings us to the final missing piece of the puzzle, Amalek. The profound closing discussion regarding the concept of Amalek should be integrated throughout the main text rather than relegated to a postscript documentary promotion.
It really is a glaring structural oversight and a massive missed opportunity for the author.
Yeah, felt tacked on.
The material spends significant time discussing the evil of the Iranian regime and its apocalyptic 12th Shiite ideology. The belief that global chaos is required to bring about a messianic era. Right there in the opening paragraphs.
Yes.
But it only introduces the ancient, clarifying concept of Amalek, the ultimate spiritual enemy of the Jews, linked in the Talmud to Geomia or Germania in the outro trailer.
Right at the very end.
By doing this, the main body of the text is deprived of its most powerful theological vocabulary, leaving the geopolitical analysis feeling slightly incomplete.
I found the definition of Amalek in that outro as a spiritual virus, whispering nothing is sacred, to be arguably the most visceral, compelling piece of writing in the entire submission.
Oh, without a doubt. It's fantastic.
Because a virus implies something invisible that infects a host and corrupts it from within. It perfectly captures the insidious nature of nihilism. When reading the main text, I kept feeling like the author was grasping for a word to describe the sheer scale of the Iranian ideological threat, and it turns out they had the perfect word all along.
They just hit it.
I just don't understand the choice here. Why save your strongest, most resonant conceptual framework for a promotional advertisement at the very end of the piece?
Well, it usually happens when an author views the main analytical text and the promotional material as two entirely different entities, rather than one cohesive experience. They think, I need to save a hook for the end to get them to click the link.
That makes sense from a marketing standpoint.
Sure, but the fix here is straightforward. Weave the definition of Amalek directly into the earlier geopolitical analysis, utilizing it as the defining framework for the evil that Esau is supposed to fight and that Jacob is supposed to resist.
So Amalek completes the triangle.
Exactly. If Esau and Jacob are the protagonists of your structural equation, Amalek is the required antagonist that gives their alliance meaning.
Wait, if we pull Amalek out of the promo and introduce it that early in the text, does the author risk overwhelming the reader with too many biblical concepts at once? We've already got Jacob, Esau, the Tower of Babel, the Second Temple. Is there a point where the theological scaffolding just collapses under its own weight?
Not if it's used as the explanatory mechanism for the modern geopolitical situation the reader already understands. You aren't giving them a theology lesson in a vacuum. You're giving them ancient names for modern terrors.
Oh, I really like that framing.
When describing Iranian regime's desire for a nuclear weapon and its twisted national purpose predicated on the destruction of Israel and America, the author should explicitly label this ideology as a modern manifestation of the Amalek virus.
So tie it directly to the real world.
Right. Don't just call it 12 Shia ideology. Call it the Amalek virus manifesting through that ideology.
So you give the contemporary threat an ancient name. You give the abstract evil a specific face. By framing it as a virus, you change how the reader perceives the threat.
Exactly.
Because an invisible virus is much more terrifying than a visible bomb, right?
A virus can infect anyone. But how does this tie back into the internal domestic issues we discussed at the very beginning, the draft dispute?
This is where the entire structure we've been discussing locks together beautifully. Later in the text, when discussing the necessity of internal Israeli unity regarding the military draft, frame that unity as the only known cure to this specific virus.
Now the narrative loop is completely closed. You have the disease Amalek, you have the cure unity.
Yes.
But does the text currently explain how that unity acts as a defense mechanism? Because saying we must be unified to cure the virus is easy rhetoric, but actually proving that it stops a geopolitical threat requires some serious logical heavy lifting.
The text gestures at it with the Rabbi Cohesion quote about the mirror, but tying it directly to the virus metaphor does the heavy lifting for the reader.
How so?
Think about how a virus works. A virus attacks a weakened immune system. Societal division, the baseless hatred that destroyed the Second Temple, is the weakened immune system.
Oh, wow.
And internal cohesion is the immune response. If you set up Amalek as the virus in the first paragraph and unity as a necessary cure in the middle paragraphs, the reader's journey is totally cohesive.
And by integrating this vocabulary throughout the body of the text, what happens to the promotional outro? Does it lose its hook?
Quite the opposite. It makes the final documentary promotion feel like the natural, inevitable climax of the entire essay, rather than a disconnected, bolted-on advertisement.
Because they've been reading about it the whole time.
Exactly. The reader will have spent the whole essay learning about the devastating historical impact of this virus. By the time they reach the promo that says, "Learn the history of Amalek," they will be desperate to engage with it because you've already proven how utterly relevant it is to their geopolitical survival.
You don't have to trick them into clicking. You've built an intellectual hunger for more context.
Exactly.
So, to briefly recap the three main points of our critique today. First, we need to create a structural bridge by tying the macro US-Iran geopolitical stakes directly to the internal Israeli unity debate, proving that domestic cohesion is the literal mechanism for external survival.
Right.
Second, we need to soften the Esau archetype by providing clear theological scaffold, focusing on historical patterns of physical might and spiritual focus, rather than triggering contemporary political partisanship.
Essential.
And finally, we need to pull the incredibly powerful concept of the Amalek virus out of the promotional outro and weave it into the main body of the text to serve as the defining framework for the geopolitical threat.
The actionable takeaway here is to establish clear, undeniable cause and effect relationships between the geopolitical fears outlined in the opening and the domestic solutions proposed in the conclusion, using your strongest theological vocabulary to bind them together.
We warmly invite you to implement these structural and thematic changes and submit your revised material back to us for another critique. We would love to see how this evolves. Because at the end of the day, if you want your reader to truly appreciate the view from the upper floors of your philosophical house, you have to make sure you've built a staircase sturdy enough to carry them up there.